He was the most famous human being on the planet, a man who could fill any stadium on Earth with a single announcement. But on the morning of August 16th, 1977, the king was found alone on his bathroom floor at Graceland, and nobody who loved him ever got the chance to say goodbye. This is the full story of how a kid from Tupelo, Mississippi climbed higher than anyone thought possible, and what fame really cost him in the end. If stories like this move you, subscribe right now, because we are just getting started. Elvis Aaron Presley came into this world on January 8th, 1935 in a two-room shotgun house on Old Saltillo Road in Tupelo, Mississippi. His family had nothing in the way of money and everything in the way of struggle. His father, Vernon, was a laborer who moved from job to job, and his mother, Gladys, was the kind of woman who poured every drop of herself into her only surviving child. Because Elvis had been born a twin and his brother, Jesse Garon, had not made it through that night, the shadow of that loss never fully left the Presley household, and Gladys held on to Elvis with a love so fierce and so consuming that it would shape every relationship he would ever have for the rest of his life. Tupelo in the 1930s and 40s was a world of red dirt roads, wooden churches, and the kind of poverty that does not announce itself because everyone around you is living the exact same way. Elvis grew up surrounded by gospel music, the kind that shook the walls of the First Assembly of God Church. Every Sunday morning, he sat in those pews and absorbed something that no music school on earth could have taught him. He felt music before he understood it, and that feeling never left him. When he was 11 years old, his mother bought him a guitar from the Tupelo Hardware Company for $7.95 because he had wanted a bicycle, and she could not bear to say no to him entirely. That guitar became the only thing in his life that ever fully belonged to him. When Elvis was 13, the Presley family packed everything they owned into a single load and moved to Memphis, Tennessee. Vernon had heard there was more work there, and Gladys had heard there was more opportunity in Memphis. Elvis entered a world that crackled with musical electricity. Beale Street was alive with rhythm and blues, the sound of Black America that white radio stations refused to play, but that seeped through every open window and every cracked door. Elvis walked those streets and listened with everything he had. He was absorbing without even knowing he was absorbing, storing up sounds and feelings that would eventually come pouring out of him in a way that nobody anywhere had ever heard before. In the summer of 1953, Elvis walked into Sun Studio on Union Avenue in Memphis and paid $4 to record 2 songs as a gift for his mother. That is the official version of events, and it is probably at least partially true. But what is also true is that Elvis knew exactly where he was walking into. He maybe knew that Sam Phillips ran that studio, and he knew that Sam Phillips was looking for something. He just did not know yet that he was the something Sam Phillips had been looking for. Sam heard the recordings and filed them away, but he did not forget the young man with the sideburns and the nervous energy who had stood in front of that microphone. It was not until the summer of 1954 that everything changed. Elvis came back to the studio, and Sam put him together with guitarist Scotty Moore and bassist Bill Black. They rehearsed for hours and nothing was working, and then during a break, Elvis started playing around with a song called That Is All Right, a blues number by Arthur Crudup, and he played it loose and fast and completely without reverence, and Scotty and Bill jumped in, and Sam Phillips came running out of the control booth because he had never heard anything that sounded like that before. It was not country, and it was not rhythm, and it was not blues, and it was not gospel. It was all of those things at once, and it was also none of them. It was something brand new, and it was coming out of a 19-year-old kid from Tupelo who had been carrying it around inside him his entire life. The record went to a Memphis disc jockey named Dewey Phillips, who played it on his radio show Red, Hot and Blue on July 8, 1954, and the switchboard lit up so fast that Dewey played the record 14 Times in a single night, Elvis was so nervous that he went to a movie theater and hid in the dark until his parents came to find him and told him he needed to get to the radio station immediately because the whole city was calling in to ask who he was. Within months, he was performing across the South, and the reaction at those shows was unlike anything anyone had seen before. Women screamed and pushed toward the stage, and the energy in those rooms was something between religious revival and a force of nature that nobody had a name for. Yet by 1956, Elvis Presley was no longer a regional sensation. He was a national phenomenon. His appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show drew an audience of 60 million people, which represented approximately 82% of the entire television viewing audience in the United States of America. At that time, the camera operators had been instructed to film him only from the waist up because his hips moved in ways that network executives had decided were too dangerous for American living rooms. That decision made him more famous than any performance could have on its own, because now everyone who had not seen him wanted to know what exactly it was that the cameras were not allowed to show. The movies came next, and with them came a kind of golden cage that Elvis would spend the rest of his life rattling against. Colonel Tom Parker, his manager, negotiated deal after deal, and Elvis made film after film, and each one required less of him than the last. The scripts were thin, the songs were written to fill soundtracks rather than to move anyone, and Elvis knew it. He was not stupid, and he was not without ambition. He wanted to make serious films. He admired James Dean and Marlon Brando, and he believed he had something real to offer as an actor. But Colonel Parker understood one thing above everything else, and that was how to extract maximum money from minimum risk, and serious dramatic films did not fit that equation. The 1960s were a decade of contradiction for Elvis. While the Beatles were changing the world and Bob Dylan was writing songs that would outlast entire political movements, Elvis was making movies with thin plots and thinner songs. He knew what was happening. He watched it all from inside the golden cage, and he felt the distance growing between who he was and who he was being asked to be. And then in December 1968, everything shifted. NBC broadcast what became known simply as the Comeback Special, and Elvis walked onto that small stage in a black leather suit and reminded the entire world in the span of 1 hour exactly who he was and exactly what he was capable of. The audience reaction was something that the people in that room said they never forgot for the rest of their lives. The 1971 through 1977 years were the years that fame stopped protecting him and started consuming him. The concerts continued and the crowds were enormous, but something behind his eyes had begun to go quiet. The prescription medications that doctors had been supplying him with for years had wrapped themselves around his life in ways that nobody around him had the courage to confront. The people closest to him had too much to lose by telling him the truth, and the people who might have told him the truth had long since been pushed to the edges of his world. He was the king, and the king was surrounded at all times, and the king was also completely alone. What Elvis Presley left behind cannot be measured in record sales or movie tickets or concert grosses, though all of those numbers are staggering by any standard. What he left behind was something far more difficult to quantify. He changed the sound of American music in a way that made everything that came after him possible. The Beatles have said it. The Rolling Stones have said it. Bob Dylan has said it. Every artist who picked up a guitar in the second half of the 20th century was working in a world that Elvis had fundamentally altered, and he did it before he was 22 years old with a $7 guitar and a feeling he could not explain to anyone but somehow communicated to everyone. The kid from Tupelo, who was not supposed to amount to anything, turned out to be the most important musical figure of the century, and the world has never quite figured out how to make sense of that. If the story of Elvis Presley moved you even a little, then you already understand exactly what this channel is About we do not tell the highlight reel version of these lives. We go into the rooms that the documentaries skip past. We ask the questions that the official biographies leave unanswered. We find the moments where everything changed, and we stay there long enough to really understand what they meant. Every single week, we bring you a story like this one, and every single week we go deeper than the week before. Hit that subscribe button right now and make sure you turn on your notifications, because the next story we are telling is one that you absolutely cannot afford to miss. And we are just getting started.